everyone. My name is Carrie Kopnick, and I am the ChI Community Minister. And we're so glad that you've joined us for ChI Talks. This is a monthly event exploring facets of spirituality through an interfaith lens with the ChI community. And it happens every month on the third Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're recording our session today, so if you wish not to be on camera, please turn off your video and your image will not appear in the recording. We'll have time at the end for questions about today's topic or about the Chaplaincy Institute. A little bit about our school. The seminary, the Chaplaincy Institute, provides education for those seeking to serve in hospitals, hospices, disasters, prisons, corporations, the military, as activists, and in environmental contexts. She trains spiritual leaders to serve as spiritual companions in our Spiritual Direction Certificate program. And we are excited to be launching a new movement ministry training called Sacred Justice Ministry, which tends the spiritual needs of our diverse justice movements. The ChI community is the oldest and most respected community that offers ecclesiastic endorsement or faith group endorsement that is recognized by the Association of Professional Chaplains, the Veterans Administration, and by the military. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to take just a moment to welcome Reverend Mary Tarbell-Green. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Mary. Mary has extensive ministry experience that includes 12-step programs, pagan, agnostic, and atheist communities. She's passionate about end-of-life ministry, providing support to patients, children, and families during critical moments. Her chaplaincy experiences include serving as pediatric chaplain and bereavement coordinator at Cincinnati's Children's Hospital Medical Center, and as a pediatric hospice chaplain at Scripps Health in San Diego. Currently, she is a funeral celebrant and was recently installed as the Assistant Minister of Pastoral Care at the First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. Welcome, Mary, and I'll turn it over to you to share an opening.
Thank you. First, I want to just disqualify myself by saying I think I might be competing with Michelle Obama. I'm not sure. So I'll do the best I can. But I'd like to open with a blessing. If we could take a deep breath and just sink in to where we are right now, this space. Oh, Holy One, you who are called by many names, we are so grateful to be holding the internet hands of one another and hearts across, it sounds like, many territories. Thank you for this gift of discernment and inquiry and curiosity that we hold holy and sacred space with one another and sink into our hearts and get all kinds of nosy about what this topic of chaplaincy is all about, in particular hospice. We thank you for our service and our willingness and our openness to be of service. And in this we pray, thank you, may it be so, and so it is. Amen. I'm in the middle of two funerals. I did one this afternoon, and then I'm doing one tomorrow night. And as a celebrant, you're called to serve for people that are non-affiliated or have left their tradition. And so I'm going to explain what it's like to do it with hospice, but in particular, you know, I show up not knowing who this person was, not knowing their family, not knowing the family dynamics, of which there are many. As the saying goes, we die as we live. And today's was beautiful. The service that I did where for the very first time, I think I've seen in a long time, the siblings, the adult siblings, the daughters went up and helped the funeral director tuck in, put their letters in, and close the casket. So it was the thing that we do at ChI when we incorporate ritual with whatever we're doing. And it was just profound. The They invited the people that weren't immediate family to leave. No one left. The place was packed, and there were tears from the coffin all the way to the end of the room. So I'm so grateful that I get to be part of that. What I want to do tonight is I want to tell my story, how I got to be a hospice chaplain. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for questions and answers, because I really like that format. I mean, I could do a didactic and talk all night, but I really want to hear from you what it is you're interested in, what it is you're curious about in terms of number one, chaplaincy, and number two, hospice chaplaincy, and in particular, number three, which is my specialty, which is pediatric hospice. So we can take a deep breath, and I'll say that again, pediatric hospice. These are prenatal, in utero, neonatal, infants, toddlers, children at end of life. And it is my calling, and I didn't know that it was, and it's been a great honor. So I'll explain that. So I'm from Cincinnati, which is where I am right now. And while I was in Cincinnati, I was working for American Airlines as the employee assistance coordinator. So employees, it was a reservations office, and about 300 employees and their families. And they would come to me about family problems or whatever. But there were also times that management would come to me. And there were not many, but enough people that I mandated into treatment were governed by the federal, the FDA, so we didn't have random drug screens, the pilots and the staff do on board a plane, but we had the same requirements. We're a Department of Transportation. So I would send people, and you could send people anywhere with American Airlines. They could fly anywhere. So often in Cincinnati, I would send them to Hazleton and Minneapolis, or places, that have better treatment than Cincinnati. And they would come back, and it was my role to meet with them for a year. Sit with them once a week for a year in order for them to get their job back. Are you going to your meetings? Are you working with your sponsor? Are you working the steps? This kind of rah, 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 rah. And those people that came back from treatment that got it had this light in their eyes. And I would sit there and I would rattle off what my role was, but I would always be captivated by, what is that light? I knew it was spiritual. It wasn't necessarily religious, but I was really drawn into that. So when I went out to California, we moved to California so we could be closer to Barry's family. I went kicking and screaming because I'm born and raised here in Cincinnati. I didn't want to, what did California have to offer me? And so I continued my work. I worked with adolescent treatment in San Rafael and Marin County. And I looked for I was a drug and alcohol counselor licensed by California. And I was looking for master programs, an MFT or an MSW, so I could continue my work. And so I'm looking at these colleges in California, and I keep being drawn to seminaries. And I'm like, what am I doing drawn to? I'm just an alcohol and drug counselor. What am I doing looking at seminaries? I was raised Catholic. My husband is Jewish. My father was Methodist. I am interfaith at my core. What am I doing at the San Anselmo Presbyterian Seminary? Or what am I, it just was boggling to me. But I think in my 12-step work, in the way that it sculpts you out, I kept listening for that next indicated step. I didn't know why I was looking at seminaries. I had no idea, but I just kept doing it. So one day I found myself on the campus of the Sophia Center at Holy Names, which is now called University, Holy Names College in Oakland. We by then had moved from Marin County over to Oakland. And I was just blown away by the model, Matthew Fox, the original blessing, the model that was interfaith, the model that spoke my name, offered all kinds of eclectic things that the Chaplaincy Institute offers, although I didn't know that at the time. And I was an old hippie, so I was really drawn to all of that. So during my third interview, you have to walk from the parking lot through the chapel at Holy Names Catholic University to your interview. And at the third interview, I said to the woman, do I have to be Catholic do I have to be Catholic to do this master's program in culture and spirituality? And she said, oh, no, not at all. So I signed up for a master's in culture and spirituality. Some of the greats, we studied Guillermo de Murchu or Thomas Merton, or we studied everyone across the spectrum. And we dipped our fingers and our toes into all the different faith traditions. It was really mind-boggling for me. It was just such a welcoming, inclusive excavation of everything that I thought I knew about who I was. It wasn't just studying theology. We had one class that was called Art of Soul Work, and we stood in front of a blank canvas with a lot of colors, and then she would do a meditation, and then we walked up there and drew from that, painted from that. So I think the reason I bring that up is because for me, I was raised Catholic, and it didn't end well for many reasons. Of course, the patriarchy and my particular upbringing, Monsignor Frecking up at the pulpit, talking about sin. And so I left the Catholic Church. And what was interesting was that, again, I want to do this theme about being open and honest and willing and following the next step, because I didn't know why I was there. But what happened for me was that there were a lot of nuns and priests on sabbatical also doing that master's program. And so I got to hear the inside story of their story. And I got to hear that it wasn't so fun for them, and that they were thinking outside the box, and that the nuns wanted to be priests, and, sexual abuse and patriarchy and all this kind of stuff. And it was such a healing for me because I was part of them and they were part of me. And that experience at the Sophia Center was really profound for me. However, when you're doing a master's program and you're writing a thesis and doing all this kind of stuff, everybody wants to know, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this? I didn't know. First of all, I didn't know why I was there, let alone what I was going to do with it, let alone working full time to try to pay my own tuition. And so I had this wonderful woman who was like a goddess in my program. And she had a lot of stature about her. She worked at California Pacific Medical Center. And she would say to Mary, I just want you to say three words. And I said, okay, fine. She said, when people say to you, what are you going to do with this? What's in your future? Here's what I want you to say. And I was all ears. I don't know. And I said, I can't say I don't know. I'm in a master's program, for God's sake. I can't say I don't know. I'm spending money. Are you crazy? Simultaneous to that, I befriended and became very close with a still very close friend of mine who's probably in her 45th year as a Salesian. So she is up on Holy Hill with Star King, and we're up on Holy Hill, as are the Salesians. It's a Catholic teaching institute. And she and I would have these discussions about faith and whatever, these really deep discussions. And she's very Irish and she's very formidable. She's about this big, but you wouldn't know it. I mean, she's a fighter. And she would say, Maddie, I know that I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God, here it is again. What do you mean you don't know? You're a nun, for God's sake. Of course you know. So I had a lot of profound teachers in my experience. And so I'm at Sophia Center, and every year you have to go to the Berkeley Festival. You have to go to the Berkeley Street Festival. So Barry and I, my husband who's on here, he and I go to the Berkeley Street Festival. And I'm tired from being in school and working full time. And so I go into the chair massage tent, and he goes nosing around up and down Shattuck Avenue. And he comes running back in about 30 minutes and says, oh my God, you have to meet this person. And I thought, we're not from here. What do you mean we have to meet this person? Oh my God, she's so much like, you wouldn't believe it. This is like the Sophia Center at Holy Names College on steroids. You have to meet this person. And I'm like, well, who is she? I don't know. Her name is Gina something. Gina, I don't know. Just come down. And there sat Gina Rose, the founder and one of my teachers, one of my mentors at Sophia, at the Chaplaincy Institute. And she's sitting there passing out brochures about the Chaplaincy Institute. And she's describing an interfaith. I think at the time there were maybe only 3 interfaith seminaries in the whole country. And it was just mind-boggling. It didn't exist. You had to be a certain religion. You had to get your MDiv and know where you stood in that religion. And so I sat with her and she gives me spiritual direction brochure, ordination brochure. Now, I'm not in the master's program to be ordained. As you know, I don't know what I'm going to do, but ordained? I mean, I was raised Catholic. That's never going to happen in my lifetime. So I go home and I sit in my living room and I read all these brochures. And I'm crying because in high school, growing up with the family disease of alcoholism, when things were not going well, I ended up in the chapel all the time. I never wanted to be a nun. Thank you, Jesus. I did want to be ordained, but I never gave it a second thought because it's not going to happen in my lifetime. So here's this person with this program that's offering that I be ordained in these traditions that include everyone. And I was blown away. So I joined the family at the Chaplaincy Institute. And again, I think I've been pretty sculpted out. I'm pretty excavated by the master's program. No. Mm-mm. You have to come to the Chaplaincy Institute and get even further sculpted out. Now, I believe that there are many people that come to the Chaplaincy Institute knowing who they are and what they want to do. And I really honor that. I wasn't one of them. I'm an artist and I want to fine tune my art and I want to give it a spiritual voice, or I'm already in the medical profession and that wasn't me. I was there on a wing and a prayer. And I think for me, I just want to say that was a gift and a blessing because I didn't have an agenda. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I'm in the ordination track, and each month I'm working full time, so I had to do it over time. Each month we're embedded in a faith tradition. We go to a mosque or we sit in a tent, of the Iroquois, or we do Sufi dancing, or we go to Father Jason Ladenza at his church in downtown Oakland, who he, by the way, is the chaplain for the police and fire department in Oakland. And he was just a Catholic priest who was, again, somebody that was so inclusive. And so I said to him, if I'd grown up with you, I may still be Catholic. So I'm just blown away by all of the relishes that are offered at the Chaplaincy Institute. And I'm naive enough and I don't know enough that I'm not forcing an agenda. I'm showing up with whatever chaplaincy ChI has to offer me. And so at one point in time, you have to do, is it 200 hours of volunteer? I think.
400. 400.
Oh. Well, back then it was 200, I think. I don't know. I had Jürgen Schwing, and I really liked his teachings. I loved his theology. I loved his approach. I loved everything. And I thought, well, okay, I'll be a volunteer at Kaiser Walnut Creek. That's where he is. He's a master's, the manager of spiritual care. So I signed up, committed, signed on the dotted line to become a volunteer chaplain at Kaiser Walnut Creek. And so every Thursday I would show up at Walnut Creek and I would get my little piece of paper with my almost always ICU patients. and I would fake it till I make it because I wasn't a chaplain. But I would go and learn to listen, learn to pick up cues, ask if they needed anything, kind of like a spiritual hospitality hostess kind of thing. I just simply didn't know what I was doing. Simultaneous to that, I have to park my car over here and walk all the way across campus to his office. Ishmael was my supervisor at the time, not Jurgen, and get my little piece of paper that would tell me who I was going to visit. I don't know, I guess about the third or fourth or fifth week, I'm walking across campus as a volunteer chaplain saying, I hate this. I hate this. It's a huge campus. And I was raised with the active disease of alcoholism, in which during the time my mother would go into the hospital with a backache or a stomach ache to detox. So here I am back in a hospital in a service role when I had no positive experiences whatsoever with hospitals. And then a voice in me said, Mary, you committed, you have to do 200 hours. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. And so I fulfilled my commitment, and I would go every week. And Thursday in the Jewish tradition is the night before Friday, Shabbos, Shabbat. They don't celebrate that. I'm just saying, as a chaplain, you have to pull out a lot of tricks out of your bag when you're visiting people who do not want a chaplain. In fact, we're called spiritual caregivers, spiritual counselors. Or if they want a chaplain, it's because you're a particular religion. So you learn to kind of certainly not stand on ceremony and go in with a Bible, but be willing to show up to where they are. And I was willing to do that. So one Thursday night, I knock on the door of this woman, and she answers the door. She pulls open the door, and I can see in the back her husband. She's got white hair. He's got white hair. He's got these gorgeous Martin Scorsese eyebrows, but there's no movement whatsoever. None. I don't really know what I'm walking into. And so I say to her, good afternoon, good evening, whatever. My name is Mary. I'm a volunteer chaplain. And she went, we're Jewish. And I went, great. We're Jewish. First of all, I was affiliated with the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center for many years, going to a grief and growing camp in Yosemite and in Santa Rosa. So I was really housed in the Jewish tradition. I had my rabbis in San Francisco that I was very close to. I had my husband, who I grew up learning the Jewish traditions. And I said, I understand. I said, I'm simply here to wish you an early Shabbat Shalom. So you got to pull things out. And with that, she starts crying. And she says, oh my gosh, we're from out of town. We just came in for a wedding. Norman, her husband, had a stroke. I don't know what I'm doing. They can't tell me anything. And I don't have any support. And I said, and I started talking to her. And eventually she invited me in. And then eventually I'm on the phone with Rabbi Eric Weiss from San Francisco, Grief and Growing. And she's just so grateful. She's gotten connected with a rabbi. This is what they do. They do grief and growing, loss, sickness, illness. He was going to come visit her. And so she said, oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Would you come over and meet Norman? And I thought, ooh, I don't know what Norman is. I don't know. And I said, absolutely. So she's on one side of the bed. He's gorgeous, by the way. I'm on the other side of the bed. Absolutely no animation whatsoever. I can barely see his breathing. And she takes his hand and she strokes his hand. They've been married a long time. And she says, Norman, this is Mary. She's a volunteer chaplain. She's here to wish us an early Shabbat Shalom. And with that, he opens his eyes and he looks at me and goes, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. That was it. That was my calling. I knew. I thought, I don't know what just happened. I don't know how it happened, but how it did and whatever, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to be. because all of the interference, all of the medical equipment, all of the medical technology and terminology, all of my spiritual, religious, whatever was non-existent. What happened there was what I learned more in pediatric hospice than anything was the sacrament of presence. In the Catholic tradition, there's the sacrament of marriage or the sacrament of the Eucharist, or what I've learned as a chaplain, as a hospice chaplain in particular, is a sacrament of presence. My job, my only job is to be present, just to be present. If I have things to offer, if I have resources to offer, great. But that's not why I'm there. I'm there to pray with them. If I'm there to get on my knees, if they're Hindu, I'm there to read from the Bible. If they're Catholic or Christian, that was my job, and that was it. And so I went home, and I had learned enough in ChI to know what CPE was, clinical pastoral education. And so I thought, well, that's my next step. I'll apply at Alta Bates to learn how to become a chaplain. Well, the deadline was over. I'm telling you all these little nuances because this is what I think your journey is, let alone whether you want to be a chaplain or not. It's really listening with a third ear to what these signs and signals are. So I applied late. In fact, I ran down to Alta Bates and handed it in person. And I thought, well, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I wasn't that Buddhist, to be honest with you. I was a little bit attached because I had my calling, don't you know? But I let it go. And 2 days later, I got the big brown envelope saying that I was a part of. So I started in September, and I did a year and a half. I did all 4 units, but then I was asked to continue on as a chaplain in med-surg, which if you want any good experience as a chaplain, go to med-surg. They hate you. The nurses hate you. You can't bond with the patients because they're only there for maybe 24 hours. And you can't get deep with anybody. It's really a good experience. I also was on labor and delivery. And so I got to work with just the opposite. I got to work with mothers and nurses who love spiritual care, nurses that are devout Catholics or whatever, but they have such a joyful job and such a hard job at those times when they have to announce news that nobody expected at all. So while I'm at Alta Bates, I graduate from Alta Bates, I start looking for jobs. Mind you, I have no experience as a chaplain. I've never been a chaplain. I've never been hired as a chaplain. So I applied for the first job that I saw, which is hospice chaplain at Kaiser in San Francisco. And I drove across the Bay Bridge to the interview, bargaining. I'll do this or I'll do that, whatever, because we're good bargainers. And I also knew too that they're going to ask me what my faith tradition is. If I'm a chaplain, for God's sake, I have a faith tradition. And I thought, oh my God. So I rehearsed a lot about interfaith, and also primarily that the 12 steps are my primary spiritual practice. But I was going to spin it because they're going to look for particular faith traditions. And so there were about 11 people in the interview, and they all had little cards, and they asked me all these little generic questions. And at one point, somebody said, "What is your faith tradition?" And I had water in my mouth, and I spit it out because I thought, oh my God, here it is. Here it is. And so I very humbly told them my experience at Holy Names and at the Chaplaincy Institute, and my deep gratitude for learning all of faith traditions, which of course hospice and hospitals are about. And that, it was my job to serve, and that I had a strong foundation in the 12 steps. which is about the God of your understanding. And I left the interview thinking, well, it was a good interview. It was a good practice. And the next day they called me and I got the job. That job was a baptism by fire. It was San Francisco back in the day when we didn't have GPS. So I had my MapQuest in one hand, driving in the other hand, San Francisco. And visiting people from everywhere. And my territory was San Francisco all the way down to Redwood City. I had 90 patients for one chaplain. As well, the administration of Kaiser in San Francisco did not like spiritual care, so they didn't rehire the chaplain at the hospital. So I was often called in there when somebody requested, not that they offered, but that they requested a chaplain. So it was a very, very hard work. It was, I'm very grateful for that work because it taught me everything. And I had my Chaplaincy Institute tribe. I had you all that I was and still am to this day connected. And so I served for about 3 years. One of the places that we visited was back in the 1980s when the AIDS crisis, when so many people, in particular in San Francisco and the Castro district, died. More than it was drastic. And one of the old convents turned into a house for AIDS patients. And then as the AIDS condition got more and more uprighted, if you will, it became a residential hospice. Another place that I served was the Zen Hospice Center. They have a house. I don't know if they still do, but it was a beautiful residential hospice. So that was my experience. And the long and short of that experience is that we moved to San Diego for various reasons. And I got a job at San Diego Hospice, which was the oldest and the best and the biggest in the world. We were the first Elizabeth Hospice and San Diego Hospice. And so we followed the model of the England hospice. They started hospice. And it was phenomenal. It was just, they had their own inpatient. My territory was La Jolla. So I'm looking at the fish and the ocean, and I'm talking to people about end of life. All of the great scientists were there, the Burns Institute, and anyway, all the big scientists were there. It was a phenomenal experience. And then in my experience visiting patients at UCSD, I wanted to tell you, just back up a second, when I went to Kaiser in San Francisco, you need a lot of support it's very isolating. You're on your own. The good news is you're autonomous. And so you can be on your own. And I really appreciated that. The bad news is you're on your own. You're driving to places that you've never been. You're on call at 2:00 in the morning, going into a neighborhood you've never been in. So I would go to the University of San Francisco in the city. They had the campus and the big church, but then across the street was a little chapel. And the nunny bunnies were in the back. They were cloistered, and they would sing the mass. And I went there every day. I went to mass every day before I went to my job. And that was really a solace for me. It was familiar, and it was also comfort for me. So any way that if you decide to do this, you get your comfort, please do. So I'm at San Diego Hospice, and a long story short, they closed down because of Medicaid, Medicare. And we had all of Scripps patients. Scripps is a big hospital there. So Scripps took their patients back, and they tried to build a hospice. And hospital treatment and hospice are very different. Hospital treatment, to be a chaplain there, it's medically driven. It's doctor driven. It's diagnosis driven. Hospice is patient driven. You're listening to the patient. What do they want? It's their choice. We have a doctor on staff, but it's their choice. So there are no more extraordinary interventions, no more chemotherapy, no more dialysis, none of that. They've come to die. So I start with scripts, and not too long into my tenure at Scripps, my supervisor calls and says, "We have an opening in pediatric hospice and I'd like you to do it." And I thought, great, I love kids. I would love to do it. Again, having no idea, none, what I was getting myself into. Most of our kids didn't talk. Many couldn't ambulate. Um, they require 24-hour care. Now, the difference in pediatric hospice as opposed to end of life adult hospice is they go back and forth between the hospital for palliation and home. The parents are going to try every measure possible to keep that kid alive, as you can imagine. So it was very medically housed. And so that, I think, more than anywhere is where I learned the sacrament of presence, because I couldn't go in with my master's from Holy Names and my Chaplaincy Institute ordination and my CPE from Out Debates. That meant nothing. It meant nothing. They were mad at God. They were, and in hospice in particular, a chaplain is the only person they can say no to. A chaplain is the only person, according to Medicare, that a patient can say no to. And it would always bum me out because I would say, oh, all I have to do is get my foot in the door because you're going to love me, kind of thing. And yet I would only be invited, say, by a nurse who said, "I've palliated my patient. This is not physical pain. This is existential pain. Please come and visit my patient." With pediatric chaplaincy, the parents didn't necessarily want me either because they were mad at God. And so these parents would have flow charts over their bed. They were case managers. They weren't just the mom or the dad. They were running the treatment, and it was phenomenal. And they brought out every stop in the world. So you didn't stand on protocol. You didn't go in with all of your expertise. You went in, and as you do in other faith traditions, you abide in their traditions and cultures. You went in and abided in the faith and tradition of these parents. Sometimes you had hard conversations when they were trying to keep their child alive beyond expectation. But again, there's a fine line. And so I want to tell one quick story and then I'm going to stop. I came back to Cincinnati and ended up in as a contract chaplain, and then did 6 months as a bereavement coordinator for the whole system. And that's talking to parents after their child has died. So pediatric hospice gave me that experience. One time I went in to visit Aria. She was just gorgeous. And when I went in to visit her, she was 5 and she had a muscular disorder and she couldn't move. So she's flat to the bed. She can turn her head, but she can't talk. She can't lift, nothing. She has no muscle. And so her mother, who was a nurse, is picking her up and whatever, and taking her outside to be in the sun. And so when I go in to visit, my first visit, I pull my chair up to the bed, and I think I'm kind and I think I'm gentle. And I pull my chair up to the bed and very softly extend my hand and introduce myself. And she doesn't talk. And so maybe it was nervous. I don't know, kind of compensating. And at one point in time, I see this tear roll down her cheek. And I realized that I was way too close. It was way too early. She didn't know me. She didn't trust me. Those are all the aspects of hospice, but they're magnified with pediatrics because they don't have all of the stuff that we have. And so you learn a whole new set of skills and resources. And what you learn to do is abide in the temperature of the mom or the dad or the sibling or the dog or the whatever. And it was and is, in fact, I'm writing a book about my stories. I collected a lot of stories about these kids, these warriors and their families. So I guess I'll end with that. I had a long conversation yesterday with a woman who's a pediatrician, and her husband here in Cincinnati is my hand doctor. And when he found out that I did hospice, he started tearing up because his daughter's on Starshine here in Cincinnati hospice. And she's 13 years old with an undiagnosed condition. She's at end of life. She's a pistol, and the family is a pistol, and they're on Instagram, Dr. Faruqi, the Faruqi Five, and they put themselves out there because she is writing a book about people won't talk about grief. And she said, you know who really won't talk about grief? My residents and my doctors. They don't talk about grief or death or loss. And so it's part of our job, I think, to companion the medical profession and really be their spiritual guide and give them language that they don't have. So she teaches a lot of residents about death and dying. One of my favorite books, Carrie's put my email in because I'm not giving you a whole bibliography, but one of my favorite is Ira Brock, Dr. Ira Brock. He's a hospice chaplain, a hospice doctor. And he wrote a book called Dying Well. I'll put this in the chat. And then another is a woman who wrote a book called Here When You Need Me. And she's a chaplain for the Maine Fish and Wildlife for the wardens. And so she may retrieve people that have drowned. Her book is so wonderful about what a chaplain is. It's very relatable. That's it. I also want to thank the Chaplaincy Institute for all the rituals and the customs and the cultures that you taught me about that allowed me to bring those in to my patients who receive them graciously and gracefully. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. Folks, what questions do you have? I think just go ahead and unmute and speak. And let me know if you need help unmuting. I can't believe all you've done, Mary. My gosh.
Mary, as someone who is starting out and hoping to work in hospice, one of the things that I think a lot about that I would love to hear you talk about is self-care and resilience. Because I feel like I need to build up those tools. Could you just talk about your approach?
Absolutely. It's vital. You can't do this work without it. First of all, when you tell people you work as a hospice chaplain, they go, oh, that's horrible. Nobody wants to. I did curves when I was in the Bay Area, and I'd have two people, it's a circle. And the person on the right, if they would, you're making small talk. Well, what do you do? And I'm like, oh gosh, here it goes. I'm a hospice chaplain. So either that person would move to the next station to get away, or they would tell me about their own experience with hospice, don't you know? So just know that you're not in a field, you're not in entertainment. I have a spiritual director that I've had for 40 years. And when I didn't go to her in Cincinnati, I went to a spiritual director in San Francisco and a spiritual director in Berkeley the entire time I was there. That's an absolute requirement. I never listened to music or podcasts in my car. I had rituals, if you will. I had songs that I would play. So pentatonics, well, it's Leonard Cohen, Alleluia. I would listen to John O'Donohue's Blessing. I would listen to, right now I'm listening to Hello Kitty by Rufus Wainwright. And never news, never the radio, never talk shows, never whatever. More often than not, to and from, nothing. If I was by water, if I was by the ocean, I went to the ocean. And I just either sat there or I took my shoes off and went in the ocean. So those are kind of sort of concrete things. I have a dog and two cats, and I would come home and play with them. And I have a husband who's a musician. And so I would listen a lot to music. So on one hand, your world becomes very small. And there were times that I was in counseling. I'm a big believer in all of that. Anything that you can do, massage, body work, for sure. Because we hold grief in our body. And so my physical regimen of working out, my walking every day, and my massage are the ways in which I work on the parts of me that don't have words for what's going on. Spiritual direction and a mentor, somebody that you can talk to about this kind of stuff.
And obviously community, because you've been installed
Absolutely.
in your church, locally your church. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, good question, Tracy. Thank you.
The word discipline, it is a discipline. It has to be. You can't do this work without it. And the translation of discipline is disciple to self.
Mary, can you hear me?
Yes.
I am very curious at a superficial level. How did you find the Unitarian Church in Cincinnati?
Well, I was at the Unitarian Church in Oakland, in
Yes.
Kensington.
Yes, I know.
And then San Diego, the first church.
Uh-huh.
And then there are several here in Cincinnati. And I went to one where actually I got married. And they were too hippie for me. I'm sorry. They were just, I don't know, they were too kind of far out there. The one I belong to now, first of all, the sanctuary itself is just gorgeous. It's a beautiful church. There's a music series that's held there. And they were very warm and welcoming. Each time I walked in, very warm and welcoming. And so I stayed. I just stayed and stayed and stayed. When I was in San Diego as a lay minister at the first church. And so I wanted to volunteer in some way, shape, or form. So it's just the personality, I guess, of that particular church. And I'm an assistant minister, not an associate minister. I don't want the responsibility of being an associate minister. So I'm an assistant minister, which I love.
I've been a religious educator for a UU religious educator for where are we? 60 some odd years.
Really?
Serving 8 different churches, and then I got ordained at ChI very early in the process. You're talking about meeting Gina. I worked with Gina when we first started.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult. Not Gina, trying to get this
Sure
off the road.
You're one of our pioneers. Thank you.
Right. Anyway, I was just curious because because of my life stream, I never did quite get ordained by the Unitarians. I've gone to
I'm not ordained by them.
I know, I heard.
But yeah, I didn't either. What they said to me was, you can do 9 months of doing this, 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 and this. And I thought, but I've already done that. And at my age, I wasn't interested. Yeah. So this assistant ministry came up, and I'm grateful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Fran. And yeah, we'll have to have you tell your story sometime at one of these, Fran.
Oh,
geez. Stories. Good stories. Anyone else about hospice or Chaplaincy Institute? Anything else? I can't see the time. Oh, we've got some time. So yeah. What else do we have?
I'd like to mention something. I've been doing hospice work here in Hawaii. And when you meet really elderly patients, you get to touch history. I had a patient here who passed away recently. And we really developed a nice relationship. And she was 96 years old. And at the age of 13, her father was an aircraft mechanic at Hickam Field on Oahu. And she had a ringside seat to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
Oh, wow.
And she talks about, running and dodging the shrapnel all of that. So this is somebody who was there.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's, and when I look at people today, I see their whole lifetime all at once. I see them as children, as young adults, as elders, as kapuna, and it's I just see the whole thing, and it's a precious thing to be able to do this.
Mhm. You know, I think that one of the gifts of Chaplaincy Institute is hospice, of course, is end of life. And what you're doing is, whether you're doing it explicitly or implicitly, you're doing a life review. And essentially, either have I been true to my faith tradition, the commandments, whatever, or for me, it's what's the meaning in my life? Did my life have meaning? And so as a chaplain, you're sitting with that person and giving them language. They're saying, well, I never really did anything. And then you sit there with a listening ear and begin to extrapolate from what they're not saying to make it so meaningful. I mean, what they did in their life was so meaningful. Being a part of World War II, in hospice today, we're seeing less and less World War II veterans and less Holocaust veteran survivors. And so that story is dying. And oftentimes, veterans have never told their story until they come onto hospice, because it's been terrifying to tell it, or they're ashamed, or whatever. And so to amplify that is just, it's wonderful. And it's, again, I want to really stress the ability just to be present with them and have them develop a trust, garner a trust that you will hold their story sacred. And that if I'm lucky enough, I will make meaning out of that so that they can go gently into that good night.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, Mary, I just want to say thank you so much. I have lots of similarities of I got sober at 18, and I've been around the whole 12-step, and I started doing hospice work, volunteer work in my early 20s, and was in the AIDS era. And I didn't go to be a hospice. It was very difficult then, right? Because I'm Jewish, but I grew up with getting sober with a God of my own understanding. There weren't many places so I've kind of filtered around on the Chaplaincy Institute for a long time. And so I do feel very blessed that I've had the great conversations and held the space and been present and all the beautiful things you're talking about. And as I'm getting older and thinking to do that, I do that inside corporations right now, which is really weird.
Oh, wow.
But has it gotten any more direct or easier going through interfaith to become a chaplain hospice? Do you know what I mean? It was like, you take these courses, but maybe you take this test and they recognize it, but they don't recognize it. Because it's not as straight a line as if I was just Jewish or if I was just.
Exactly.
And yeah.
Well, I had a supervisor at Alta Bates that was Southern Baptist. And he said, what do you mean interfaith? And so he would make me defend my verbatims from an interfaith perspective. And he nourished that in me. He nurtured that in me. And so he gave me a platform, and he gave me a language, and he gave me confidence. I have a nephew whose daughter is in the 8th grade, and she's a devout Catholic, an 8th grade devout Catholic. Woo! So we're sitting around the kitchen table one day, and I don't know, it comes up because I've done a lot of my family's services. And she says, well, what is interfaith? And I explain what interfaith, and she looks at me and goes, well, what's the point? Because people don't know where they stand with you. And so it's not my job necessarily to defend that. And certainly less and less and less. And I don't, but it is, and I think today more than ever, it's so vital because it's such odds with one another. Everything's so black and white. And there's a political ticket that's being run on a religious perspective that is just hateful. And so for us to be interfaith and to be able to hold that and pray for them and to give voice to that and or walk away, I think we need ChI, interfaith, more than ever. And it also gives us the education to learn about what interfaith is, what to go into a mosque and to really just honor that faith tradition and learn about it and how devout they are. So, and Hasidic Judaism, the same, from Hasidic Judaism to humanistic Judaism. Whew. Yeah. So I truly love the God of my understanding. For me, more and more, it's nature. I sit on the Ohio River and I go out every morning in the dark and just sit looking at I have all my books, my meditation books and stuff. And I rarely open them because the river has so much to teach me. It's placid on the surface and it's got this big current underneath, which is what life is. Life throws curves and currents. And so I'm grateful, for my spiritual practice being in nature.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hop in here. We're really at time, although Mary, I think we could listen to you for hours. A quick little answer about jobs and being an interfaith hospice chaplain. Our people get jobs that don't match the qualifications. They get jobs that they don't have the education or experience listed in the job description because of interfaith.
Exactly.
I think in some places they say, oh my gosh, we don't have to teach you not to evangelize. We don't have to worry that you're going to not be accepting. And so, as the person who often writes the letter of recommendation or whatever, yeah, it's a really powerful thing.
Definitely.
The Chaplaincy Institute. Yeah. I have two other things that I want to say, and I had to, of course, write them down because I can't remember anything anymore. We aren't on Holy Hill anymore, Mary. We're in Zoom. So we don't have an office anymore in Berkeley. And for those of us that, I got to experience that, but for the students today who don't get to experience that, it's a loss. And isn't it beautiful that we can hop on the Zoom screen? We've instituted twice monthly cohort meetings. So the people who are students with us today meet with the same group of people every other week through their time. So they don't get to go to lunch together, but they do have these strong bonds that form. And then we also, in 2018, we switched so we don't do one faith, just for you all to know, we don't do one faith at a time anymore. We do global spiritual traditions and theological literacy and ChI culture and foundations, and it kind of mixes together. And that Theo Lit class, I think some of our students could speak to. It's big. Are you in that right now, Tracy? You're headed into it? Yeah, 800 pages of reading. And but I'll tell you, I took it for fun 2 years ago again. So it's good stuff. All right. Well, I am going to ask
my
you.
My email address is in the chat. If there's anything, any resource or any questions, please don't hesitate to email me.
So we will be sending out we'll send out an email with this recording to everybody who registered and everybody who decided to go watch Michelle instead of
Michelle Obama
today. And I'll list those books that we talked about, and I'll have Mary's email address and anything else, Mary, that you want to send to me to make sure that goes out in those resources. It'll be in your inbox. I don't know when, by the end of the week, sometime the weekend, something like that. But let's take a moment here to thank Mary. I'm going to invite everybody to unmute and just say thank you. And then Mary, maybe you can give us a little closing and we'll blow out our candle.
Sure.
So let's unmute and say thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
privilege.
Thank you, Mary.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Mary, for marrying me. I'm the
So
lucky
if we
one.
can just put our hand on our heart and take a deep breath, and speaking of Michelle Obama, just sink into the new possibility of hope in our lives today. It doesn't mean that we stop what we do, and it means we need ChI even more to broaden our perspectives and open our hearts. And so, Holy One, who are called by many names, that is what I want and need, and I'm grateful for, is that ability and capacity to be open and to be pried open and to stay open. Thank you for the gift of these lovely faces. Thank you for the gift of community. And thank you for the greatest of these, faith, hope, and love. Love. Amen.
Amen.